Good morning. My name is Chuck Black. I'm with the Age of Ingenuity podcast, and I'm in Ottawa. It's about 1 p.m., an hour before everything starts, and holy crap, there's an awful lot of people out here today. I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy. And here's what's happening. Al and I went on a field trip last week. We went to Ottawa to cover the August 29th, 2020 Parliament Hill protests against the federal government's current response to the pandemic.
And I'm Alan Calder, and it was a great trip. We've learned a lot of useful things, met some really interesting people, and we're going to share some of what we learned and our perceptions of the day with you.
But we're also going to remind everyone to like, comment, share, subscribe, and support this vidcast on Patreon, on PayPal, and on social media. With that said and done, here are the stories we're currently tracking. And for our first story today, and as outlined in the August 29th, 2020 Ottawa Citizens Post, Parliament Hill protesters denounced tyranny, demand end to COVID-19 restrictions. This article notes that hundreds of protesters wearing raincoats, but not face masks, gathered on Parliament Hill on Saturday to demand an end to government-imposed rules designed to limit the spread of COVID-19. And I don't think the article's all that terribly accurate. Al and I were in attendance, and we weren't wearing raincoats. And we also noted thousands of people, not just hundreds. And we've even taken a few pictures to illustrate what we saw. Al, what did you see?
Well, they must have been hiding behind those thousands of people then, because no one there looked like they were wearing a mask. I saw probably I don't think I saw anyone, to be honest, though, wearing a mask when we were there on Parliament Hill, or usually even on the way in. As an aside, in Ottawa, they were wearing fewer masks than they are in Toronto as well. They really are, though, I felt.
Yeah, I noticed that. I work downtown Toronto in I guess the Bloor, the Spadina area. And I would say like 50% of the people are wearing the mask outdoors, even on a day like today where it was sunny and bright and 22 above out. And I don't see any logical reason for wearing masks, but lots of people in downtown Toronto were, and lots of people in Ottawa simply weren't.
In Toronto, I've seen the car driving too, by myself in a car, kind of driving with the mask on. That is nonsensical, but I saw that still in Ottawa, but not as much as in Toronto, though, which I felt, not 10%, but a lot more than one car here and there for the mask wearers in their car alone.
Yeah. And that sort of reminds me of another article on this topic. The August 29th, 2020 CBC News Post covers the same event, but it uses the title "Global Rally Against COVID-19 Safety Measures Comes to Parliament Hill." And it argues that there's a lot of online misinformation about pandemic safety measures. As a personal aside, I would suggest that some of those pieces of online misinformation were included in the CBC article. They quoted the Parliamentary Protective Service as saying only 1,200 attendees attended the protest at its peak, and I saw more than that.
That's obscenely stupid, Chuck. Honestly, that was like, have they never counted before then? That was ridiculous, though. How would they? Yeah. Who says that stupid garbage? Honestly, that was so far away from the truth.
I think you took some photos. I took some photos. Yeah, we're going to put them in this video. You're going to get a sense of what actually was going on there that day. And obviously we took pictures of more than hundreds of people. We took pictures of more than 1,200. There was, I don't know. I thought the best overview of the event was the live coverage from Laura Lynn Thompson Tyler. We're going to include her video with the show notes. She also recorded all the speeches, about 4 hours of talking. It's well worth taking a look at if you've got time. But she estimated the crowd side at somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000.
But she wasn't there though either, was she?
No, she wasn't. She had a number of people recording it. She's actually located in Vancouver. I'm a bit
Yeah.
envious. She's been doing a lot of the protests lately. She's been covering them using local people. And you're right. There may have been more, and she wasn't around. She
Well,
wasn't
that's
on
well,
site.
she was as around as the CBC,
Yeah.
to be fair. And I appreciate that she had people there doing this for her, but she wasn't there as well. It's just I was mentioning that then. And the guy who was doing it, her recording that and videotaping, wasn't a not
Yes.
bad spot for it either. He was in front of where you and me were near the end of it too.
Yeah, he had a good location.
Yeah.
He saw everything was going on stage. I intentionally wanted to take shots of the crowd, so I tended to walk through the crowds. I got near the stage at the end,
Yeah.
but I mostly wanted to see what the people looked like. I think you'll notice some good shots there. I tried to get some really good photos of some of the people who were protesting. My favorite shot is a picture of Justin Trudeau with his beard. So it's a recent shot, and the caption reads, "I commit crimes so you don't have to," which I thought was pretty funny.
It is very funny then for that too. But he obviously was not there. But when we were going into that section, Chuck, I think worth noting is that where that report, or rather that individual was taking that video from, was
Yeah.
in the center area of it all. To the left of that guy, ironically, it was the French section, or my left actually. My left was the French section. You could tell by the French flags and the French language, and I couldn't understand anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to mention too that there were so many different flags out there. There was all these different flags out there, and I felt the whole thing screamed of a unity that wasn't there at Queen's Park. Even though everyone at Queen's Park every week speaks English, that there not everyone speaking English, I felt like we were all on the same team, really on the same team. We were really there for the same reason. It was really a moving event.
I got that impression as well. I was surprised at the fleur de lis flags from Quebec at the protest. I talked to some of the organizers. They said that because of the rain, because of traffic jams, half the people from Eastern Canada didn't get there in time. So that would have made quite the substantial crowd. I also note that it was cold. I also note that it was wet. You were smart enough to go to the dollar store and buy umbrellas for everybody in our party.
Yeah.
But I was hoping for a nicer day. I bet that the crowd would have been easily twice as large if we had a bit of sun.
I agree with that too. And also, did not go to the July the Canada Day one this year? I'm sure in Ottawa. Did you?
No, I didn't. That disappointed me. I think we can include links to the event, probably from Laurelyn, Thompson, Tyler, and from others. We'll include that in the show notes. But I wasn't there. I was kind of disappointed about that.
But I was also talking with people about that, and they were suggesting that it was relating to the crappy weather. And it was crappy, admittedly that. But there's still so many people there, though, even the crappy weather notwithstanding, though. And they were mentioning that a lot too, and they were those were the ones that were there too, not the ones that weren't there.
Yeah, there was. I found a lot of people on site who were elegant, eloquent, more than willing to talk. Oh, there was some of the Quebec, the Quebec contingent were particularly elegant. Living in Toronto, you don't get to see the classy people.
Fair enough. me living in Whitby, we see what you're talking about here from there.
I think it's noteworthy that the protest was organized through an organization called the Line International, but included a number of smaller not-for-profits that were involved in this area as well. They don't believe that masks should be mandated. They don't believe that any form of lockdown should continue. They essentially don't believe in the what I was told is something almost akin to medical martial law that seems to be infecting the ability to do business, the ability to make friends, the ability to go outside your social circle and meet new people, and at some point even the ability to get a date for the weekend. We both know at least a couple people who go to these sorts of protests just to find people they can date, because everything else is, up until recently, at least 2 weeks ago, I guess, was essentially locked down. And even if it's open, you're not really supposed to get too close to people.
They still are, in a sense, and the draconian rules are still in place. I went to a store. It was a marijuana store this past weekend
Hmm.
to buy some, as I've been taking it for a long time, like medicinally, in fact.
Yeah.
And they wanted to take my temperature and see my identification.
Oh dear.
They had
Uh,
to. I can't repeat what I said to them,
did you
but
did you tell them you had a medical exemption for it?
I did. I 100% did.
Didn't take?
He didn't care. He wanted my temperature. He didn't want to know my problems. He wanted to know my temperature.
Wow.
Rules are rules, he said.
Yeah, and I believe that some of these rules are ambiguous enough so they can be interpreted in any one of a number of ways. The government can say that we're not mandating it. We have a number of exceptions that allow people who don't wear masks to be included within the legislation. But then they go in the back door. They go to the businesses. They go to the people with the open buildings, and they say, you know, if we come in with a I don't know, someone from the health department, and they notice people in the building without masks, we will fine you,
Yeah.
and things like that. So it, there's no trail of responsibility, but everybody feels they have to go along. It's I don't know, it's almost like the Stasi in East Germany in the 70s and the 80s.
How so?
Well, there were no hard and fast rules, but everybody knew that if you did something wrong, somebody would inform on you. At one time in East Germany, a third of the population was getting part-time wages through the domestic intelligence agency, the Stasi. And I notice out here, even there's signs saying, if you see something you don't like, call the authorities,
Hmm.
which is what the Stasi was in the 80s. We certainly have a lot of that going on, and I think that's a large part with why these events are so popular, and why so many people are involved in these events. Uh, in Canada, as I said, they're involved the Line International, which I'm told has 16,000 followers on Facebook, and probably far more than that who are interested in what they're doing. But it's also worth noting that the Ottawa protests were only one of a series of protests taking place all around the world. And for that, I referenced the August 27th, 2020 New World Next Week post, World Rising Up Against the Lockdowns as protest mounts. And that podcast noted a lot of protests in Europe, a lot of protests in the States, protests in major centers across Canada. And even in Asia, it's evidently a lot of people don't like the idea of lockdowns. A lot of people don't like the idea of not being able to tell their politicians whether or not they agree with what's going on.
I think they would call that a association.
Yeah, freedom of association is important these days, and who knows? Cancel culture. If you hang with the wrong people, people are going to call you bosses these days.
I agree, Chuck.
Uh,
I guess who's the enemy now, us or them? Who is the them? Us?
yeah, that was the benefit of the Stasi. You never knew who was
Yeah.
against you. Everybody kept it secret. Uh,
Everyone's against you then in that case, right?
yeah, although I note that people were arrested in Berlin. That
Yeah.
was the largest protest. Generally, they concede that there was at least 38,000 protesters on the Saturday in Berlin, protesting against the lockdown, against the restrictions the
Right.
governments have instituted in order to control the coronavirus. Uh, some people say there were more than 38,000. Some people say there were as many as 500,000. But according to the August 29th, 2020 U.S. News and World Report post, Berlin police arrest 300 disband protest against coronavirus curbs. They arrested a lot of people. The police broke up the protest after demonstrators failed to keep their distance and wear masks as instructed.
That's so wear your mask and keep away from each other. Those pictures, Chuck, I saw them. How in the hell could they possibly suggest there were that few people there? If there were that many people there, they would have taken up the entire city at 6 feet apart. You know what I mean? They'd have to
Yeah.
they'd have to kill half of them and arrest the other half.
I don't know. I think Germany is a weird place. At least in Canada, we are so far being allowed to protest. There are
Hmm.
so far not a lot of legislation demanding that we wear our masks when we're indoors. There is at least a hope that, well, Toronto's in stage 3 right now. There's at least a possibility that the city will be able to open fully at some point. But that could
Yeah.
change come fall.
Exactly, Chuck. The reason being is that those are not part of our Constitution. The law of the land is the Constitution. That's the one we follow. Not the other ones are secondary to that. That's it.
No,
Seriously,
I
the other ones are just bylaws and crappy allowances. Ned, we have our rights there. Rights are not privileges; they're rights. We were born
yeah.
with them. They don't allow us to have our rights.
I accept that for the last 4 or 5 months, we've not really been governed by the rule of law. We've been governed by edict. We've been governed by
Mhm.
announcement. There's been no due diligence from the public. I think that's where a lot of this protest is coming from. It's the idea that there is this arbitrary legislation that comes down every once in a while, and governments expect we're going to live with it, and that's true whether or not this is Rob Ford's Ontario, or Justin Trudeau's Ottawa, or Angela Merkel's Germany. Just somewhere, somehow, democracy was taken off the rails, and now it's absolute power, ruled by whoever thinks they're in charge, whoever kowtows to Bill Gates, maybe.
Mhm. Whoever wants the money will do what they've got to do. That's why they're in politics in the first place, I guess. You know, if they don't get funded for their elections, they're not elected. The good guys we don't know about because of that fact.
No, I agree 100%. I also think it's worth noting, getting back to the Canadian protest, the organizations affiliated with the Line, organizations like one of them is called Hugs Over Masks. They're out of Toronto. And you and I have been going to the beach parties. We know that Hugs Over Masks has been gathering in groups of hundreds of people across the country at Queen's Park, and for beach parties at the end of the Saturday protest. They've been doing it without masks, without social distancing, but with dancing and fun
Oh yeah.
conversation. And they've been doing this for at least, I don't know, 22 weeks. And
Hmm.
the same people come out every week, a few more every week, and no
Or
one
more,
seems
really.
to have gotten sick with COVID-19 or any other disease. I'm curious to know why the protests haven't kicked off any new pandemic after 22 weeks. This stuff is supposed to kill us all after 2 weeks.
This thing is statistical, not medical. They
What do you
can
mean?
make this happen no matter what. They don't need anything. If you understand statistics, this is a bunch of garbage. The testings are shitty. They're testing that don't even work, and they know that. And then they push them on as they don't work. They're having like 50% false positives. That's not science. That's a goddamn crapshoot. Seriously.
I do agree that it often seems as if nobody is really studying the facts. The facts,
They don't
as
care.
we understand it, they seem to fly in the face of conventional wisdom.
And science too. And why do and doctors who stand up and say, oh, "Wait a minute, I was taught this in school." This guy that is out of a job now. You know, he tells
Yeah.
the truth. You know, too much. Put a mask on him so big no one could take it off. He's a doctor.
No, I agree. And instead of vigorous peer review and figuring out the flaws in theories and drawing conclusions out of evidence-based experiments,
Hmm.
people who disagree with the government are essentially banned, and lose their jobs and can't talk about anything anymore. I'm
It's
very concerned about this.
I am frightened as hell, Chuck. And this is the Canadian scientific process. Do what you're told. Period.
Yeah, maybe it's just, maybe it's all our health plan. We're
Whatever
only be
they don't give it. They don't want to know what the science. They're deathly afraid of what the actual science is because
Yeah.
they know what it is. Because they know this before they locked us down. They knew this is garbage before they locked us down. Before this was on us, they knew it was not what they say it is. They're using this virus for their own benefits, and fascism loves power.
Yeah. I want to think the best of everybody, and I want to believe that, at least when I looked at the evidence in February and March, there wasn't a lot of it. So it was reasonable to assume the worst and take precautions. But we were supposed to take 12 days to lower the curve, and those 12 days took 4 months, maybe longer, and the curve's still not lower. Now the curve's got to be really flat.
Why
Curve's
the
got to
hell
be
is
flatter than my bank balance right now.
Why is the curve the standard we're using then?
I don't think it is the standard we're using anymore. Nobody seriously thinks the curve has to be flattened anymore.
Why was that ever a standard we had been using at all? No scientist or doctors ever thought that was reasonable at all.
It might have been.
Bed.
Yeah, it might have been a marketing campaign punchline. Certainly, it's lived well past its usefulness. I'm also concerned about. Everybody's talking about a potential second wave this fall. Certainly, that's going to influence any Canadian election. I kind of think that Justin Trudeau is in campaign mode right now. He's going to bring down a budget in the fall that's going to promise everybody the world because he has a new finance minister who believes in money for nothing and giving everybody a few extra bucks. And Justin's going to call an election based on it if the NDP will let him. My perception is that the NDP has no money. They don't want to run an election. They're afraid that their leader Jagmeet Singh is decently unpopular among people these days, and they're afraid that if Trudeau gets to call an election, the NDP will be wiped out. So maybe he won't get an election.
Well, I'm sure he'll call it when it suits him.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But don't forget, it has to suit him as well, depending on many other things then, but other his friends as well. But he'll do it when it suits him. He can. Yeah. It's our system, especially under these emergency edicts that we have to live under.
Yeah, I would. Our system has been hijacked. Trudeau has a minority government. It should be relatively easy to defeat them. Some of the best legislation in Canadian federal government history comes during minority governments because the leaders know they have to work together and cooperate. But Trudeau didn't even bring down a budget in March of this year. He didn't need to. He hasn't had any non-confidence votes up until a week or so ago. His major competitor, the Conservative Party, essentially had no leaders. Yeah. The Bloc, I think the Bloc a month or so ago, the Bloc decided they would bring down the government if they could. But Trudeau and the Trudeau Liberals and the Singh NDP have been welded together at the hip for a long time, and they're not accountable to the people. And as long as they're a pandemic, they need never be accountable to the people because they can say the scientist says I have to do this. And for that, I give you go.
The scientists meaning what then? The scientists paid for by Canada or private scientists then?
I don't know. I think Canada has a chief health person, a woman. I forget her name.
Yeah. Not Tam. You're talking, right?
Yeah, Dr. Tam. I remember Dr. Tam.
Wear a mask. Have sex with a mask on. Try a glory hole.
Oh God! What a stupid thing she came down with 2 days ago. What did she? It came out in a newspaper report, right? If you're going to have sex, you should not kiss, and you should keep your lips covered, and you should wear a mask.
Yeah. If I was kissing her, I would hope she have a mask on too, to be honest.
Maybe an entire paper bag.
Yeah, indeed, then, or a mask made of gin and tonic.
Yeah.
For me then, but that's a terrible advice. The problem is no one's calling them out, as you mentioned, on the science garbage that they're pretending to science in.
Yeah.
It's not though. It's really not science then.
It's not science if you disenfranchise legitimate peer review.
Exactly. That's what science is, peer review. It's part of that. It's a crucial part of science then.
And they're jumping through hoops right now. They finally concluded that Africa, tropical and subtropical areas have virtually no COVID-19 transmission, virtually no COVID cases at all. Hardly any deaths. Somebody did a calculation. I'll put the article in the show notes. But he suggested that only 1/7 as many people catch COVID in tropical and subtropical areas, and it's worse among the poor, the people who can't afford the mask, the people who can't afford to self-isolate. They seem to be catching COVID less than everybody else, and they're going out of their way to figure out how this can possibly happen And then to me, the obvious evidence is there. Poor people who live together and can't self-isolate in tropical and subtropical areas are more likely to catch malaria. And there's an awful lot of anti-malarial drugs that are sold over the counter in subtropical countries, and one of those is HCQ.
Oh no! What if people find out about that? What
Well,
if people
they're
find
not going
out
to
that?
reading these articles anyway.
Yeah,
That's
I agree.
that's an entirely unvalidated assumption, but I'm surprised that nobody is at least
I have a
taking
question.
a look at that.
Yeah, that's the doctors have been prescribing that in Canada though, as well as
Yeah,
zinc, which is required of it for it
yeah.
rather. And I couldn't get zinc. I take zinc for other reasons then, but I've not been able to find it. That tells me that the doctors are prescribing it to people who need it with zinc, which is actually the cure for the COVID.
Yeah, I've noticed that zinc is hard to get. I used to take it all the time for colds because
Yeah.
if you take a rumor has it
Mhm.
that if you take zinc, it clears up your cold faster than you normally would get it. But zinc's been hard to come by over the last little while.
I agree, Chuck.
I've looked at shoppers, I've looked at Rexall, and it's hard to come by.
I agree 100%, Chuck. What a coincidence then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I don't believe in coincidences either, Chuck.
I'm more concerned about countries that use the lockdown as an excuse to implement an oppressive regime. We mentioned Berlin earlier with all the protesters arrested.
Yep.
I notice Australia seems to be going the way of the dodo as well. As outlined in the September 2nd, 2020 Sky News post, Andrews must go tonight after horrible example of inexcusable powers used. Sky News is reporting that a pregnant mother had been arrested for posting tweets on Facebook suggesting that the lockdown shouldn't occur, and she had been attempting to connect and to help organize anti-lockdown protests on Facebook. And they came into her home, and there was a number of police officers. They all wore masks.
There's a lot of them too in her house.
Yeah, and she recorded it. She was carted away, and they arrested her for posting perfectly legal political comments on Facebook. And I find that most disconcerting. I think it'll take her 6 months and several tens of thousands of dollars to get a lawyer to get that thing overthrown. And that to me is simple harassment. Everybody knows that this charge will not stick, but they arrested her anyway. I don't like that idea.
So that begs the question then is that what kind of police are doing this job then? Are they must, I know people don't like to talk about it. The police are not the bad guys. They're always the good guys, right? But they always seem to be the bad guys in my world. I'm the kind of guy that believes in human rights. The police are always seems to be the one who are taking those away.
Well,
maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like that somehow.
I would argue that police are essentially a tool of government.
Absolutely.
Good government that's beholden to the people use police for what they should be used for. Moderate government, moderately bad government, sometimes they use the police for revenue generating, for ticketing people, and really bad governments utilize the police to squash dissent. And I'm afraid that might be what's happening here.
Well, that's 100% what they're trying to for then. But the problem is the police are on board with that in Australia. At least the ones in that room were. The ones that were doing that, if they don't know better, then what are they teaching them in Australia about police to do then?
Yeah.
Like, is that just a mistake then? Did they have the wrong house?
I don't think it's a mistake. I think that Sky News did a follow-up post the next day.
Yeah. I watched that too, by the way.
Yeah, the chief of police saying that we can't make exceptions for these people if they break the law. We have to bring them in and charge them. And then they showed the same guy 3 months back talking about Black Lives Matter and saying, Black Lives Matter, we can't arrest them all, so we're going to let them protest even though there's a lockdown.
Yeah, I agree 100% that some groups are more equal than others, I guess. And those are the stories we're covering this week. As always, the articles we've referenced are listed in the show notes.
Keep in touch with us. on Facebook, Gab, LinkedIn, Minds, Pinterest, Steemit, and Twitter. Check out other stories we're tracking on our innovation news and upcoming events Scoop It feeds. And remember, like, subscribe, share, and comment on our posts. Your actions will feed the algorithms and bots which help to distribute our stories. And if you'd like to promote your event, your activity, or if you think you have insight into Canada's current innovation economy, send me an email. I'm at chuck.black@protonmail.com.
And we're currently on YouTube and BitChute and hope to be on other platforms soon. If you like the content we create, send some money to our Patreon and PayPal accounts. We really appreciate your patronage, and we couldn't do it without you.
Absolutely. And that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with more stories covering our current age of ingenuity.